All right. First order of business.
Shenanigans
Review.
commence.
So we've only got a couple more weeks of review left because we're almost done with Galatians. So we're gonna back the review up a little bit and start this off with who wrote the book of Galatians. Okay, good, excellent. We're on a roll. Paul, yes. So he wrote the book of Galatians to the church at Galatia. I'm not going to give you one that easy. I should know better than that by now. But I will give you a pretty easy one. What problem with the church at Galatia is Paul writing to address? We're getting clever answers in the chat. Yes, sin forgetfulness. That's true. Judaizers. Yes, excellent. Okay, what were the Judaizers teaching? Yeah, Jesus and works. Combining two texts. That's correct. Yeah, work. So the idea that for salvation, you need to both trust in Jesus and become a Jew. Hence, Judaizers. So you needed to be circumcised. You need to sacrifice at the temple. You need to follow the code, the Jewish law. Basically, to become a Jew and a Christian in order to be saved. Yep, exactly. Complete salvation. How would you characterize Paul's response to the Judaizers? Is he pretty chill? Is this kind of this intellectual discussion for him? Is he going full on discussion down with these guys? Yes. Yes, Bob.
You're welcome.
Good. At least I figured if one thing would sink in for you guys on the study, that's what it would be. Yeah. Good. Yes. Yeah. He takes this pretty personally. So why is it because his ego got involved, or is there something else in play here? Why is Paul so upset? Because he is. He's freaking out, right? He's cursing. He's telling the Judaizers in no uncertain terms exactly what they can do with their theology, um, or what rather their theology should lead them to do, I should say. But yes, it's barely controlled anger, right? Why is he so upset? What does this tell us about why he's so upset?
Is this like part of the when you guys have Bible study every week? Do you have like you were supposed to read Galatians or something?
Yeah. So good question. We've been in Galatians for the last like 3 months, I think. Yep. So we're kind of come up on the end. So we're just doing a little bit of review, and then we'll get on to the passage that we're going to go over tonight. But yep, we've been in Galatians. Yeah, 400 years was the Roman study. 500 years was the Genesis study.
Okay, there you go. Yeah.
I didn't study the Galatians, but I mean, I have a feeling why I think he would be upset because they were practicing law versus grace. If that's what they were doing in Galatians.
Yeah.
It's been a while since I've read Galatians.
Well,
but
that's exactly it.
If they're teaching law, then that's not good because we live under grace instead of law now.
Exactly. Yep. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why that it's bad and important to correct that teaching, right? So it's important to correct that teaching because that leads to a misunderstanding of salvation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, Paul basically says Jesus plus work. You know, if you're looking at works, something that's going to save you, it's going to nullify salvation, which is pretty strong statement from him.
Agreed.
So he says, that there's that, and then also it creates divisions in the church, right? It creates two classes of Christian. And one of the things that he really stresses in Romans and Ephesians and Galatians is that we are all as Christians equal before God. Jew, Gentile, male, female, rich, poor, we're all equal before God in regards to value, right? Because none of us come before God on our own merit. We can't. If we try, we fail. We all come before God on Christ's grace only. And because of that, we are all equal heirs before God. Now we're heirs of the throne. We talked about the inheritance that Christ has bought for us, but we can't do anything to add to that. Therefore, we should not put ourselves up over one another either. And that's what that's what the Judaizers doing within the Galatian church. It was causing divisions and all sorts of misunderstanding and spiritual abuse and weird power structures and all that sorts of stuff. So that is why Paul is talking about this. And that, again, what we've talked about, how theology matters, right? Theology matters because what we believe is important, and what we believe drives our actions. So when Paul gets all upset about this, he's not upset because it's not just a theological issue. It's an issue of salvation. It's an issue of how they approach God and how they approach each other. All right. So, last week we talked about some of the fruits of the Spirit, some of the opposite of the fruits of the Spirit. I thought that was a great way that Wing had put that, contrasting the groups of sins that are mentioned in Galatians 5, and then the fruits of the Spirit and how they kind of contrast each other. And this week we're going to continue to talk about kind of the implications of what we've been talking about throughout all of Galatians. So, as Paul's custom is, he talks about the theology for the first half to 2/3 of the letter, and then talks about how that should affect our life for the rest of the letter. All right. So, without further ado, can I have a volunteer to read Galatians 6 verses 1 through 10, which is where we'll be tonight?
Where did my...
I'll do it.
Go ahead.
Which chapter did you say it was?
Chapter 6 verses 1 through 10.
Let's see here. Now I've got the New Living Translation. I guess that's okay.
Ooh, NLT.
Mhm.
You're getting on dangerous, grand boy.
We'll allow it.
Okay. Dear brothers and sisters, if another believer is overcome by sin, or overcome by some sin, you who are godly should gently and humbly help that person back into the right path, and be careful not to fall into the same temptation yourself. Share each other's burdens, and in this way obey the law of Christ. If you think you are too important to help someone, you are only fooling yourself. You are not that important. How far? Which verse did you want me to read to?
Read through verse 10.
Okay. Pay careful attention to your own work, and then you will get the satisfaction of a job well done. And you won't need to compare yourself to anyone else, for we are each responsible for our own conduct. Those who are taught the Word of God should provide for their teachers, sharing all good things with them. Don't be misled. You cannot mock the justice of God. You will always harvest what you plant. Those who only live to satisfy their own sinful nature will harvest decay and death from that sinful nature. But those who live to please the Spirit will harvest everlasting life from the Spirit. So let's not get tired of doing what is good. At just the right time, we will reap a harvest of blessing if we don't give up. Therefore, whenever we have the opportunity, we should do good to everyone, especially to those in the family of faith.
Thank you.
I need to turn my light on. I was trying to read that in the dark.
Well, the memes are already going in the channel, so the chat is fantastic as usual. I tell you, that is the downside to listening to the recordings of these as I'm driving around, is that I don't get to watch the chat. Kind of disappointing.
My bad.
Okay.
My apologies.
No worries. Verse. This section of verses, at first glance, seems kind of disconnected. Seems like Paul's kind of jumping around, talking about a bunch of different things, almost as if he has a few things to say before he's wrapping up. Just kind of going through a list of things that he want to talk about. That's at first glance. If you actually look at it, though, in the context of what's before it, what's after it, and the whole thing, it actually follows a pattern. So the one of the commentators I was reading, I thought did a good job of kind of pointing this out. It goes, so verses 25 and 26 of chapter 5 is kind of the heading for this section. And then it alternates on a theme of mutual accountability versus personal responsibility. So the first half of verse 1 is about kind of our mutual accountability, our responsibility to the church. And then the second half is about our personal responsibility. Verse 2 goes back to mutual accountability, verses 3 through 5 to personal responsibility. Verse 6 is back to mutual, verses 7 through 8 back to personal, and then 9 through 10 is mutual again. I think that's a pretty good way of... Go ahead.
Sorry, I wanted to interject. I forgot to mention this, but we didn't go all the way through chapter 5 last week. We stopped one verse short.
Okay.
I stopped at verse 25. We didn't include verse 26. And when you said that verse 6 acted as a header to chapter 6, it reminded me.
You know what? I should have noticed it because the recording said verse 25. Yeah. Okay. No, so that's fine. So yes, verse 25 and 26 acts as a header. So let's just back up real quick and read those. I'll just grab those for you. If we live by the Spirit, let us also keep in step with the Spirit. Let us not become conceited, provoking one another, envying one another. Okay. So that's the heading. Thanks, guys. So I think we're gonna keep focusing on these things, but I do want to mention that is kind of the lead into this, and then Paul talks about the ways that we do that. Okay, so let's take a look at verse 1 first. Again, the first half is kind of our mutual accountability. The second half is our personal responsibility. So, brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual shall restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watching on yourself, lest you too be tempted. So I got this memorized in King James, and I was reading it in ESV, and got all collected. Okay,
That's an unholy amalgamation right there.
Yeah. Well, whatever. So, if any of you is caught in a transgression, you who are spiritual shall restore him in a spirit of gentleness. What does this mean?
Sounds like the opposite of the Judaizers.
Which verse did you read that from?
It is chapter 6, verse 1. The version that we're using is ESV. That's just the one that I usually read out of this consistency's sake. Yeah. Okay, so what does it mean to that if someone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual shall restore him?
I guess sin. Doesn't have to be sin, I don't guess. It could be anything you're upset about.
All right. It's a good thought. Go ahead, Kess. Kess has her hand raised.
I'm going to borrow. Lewis said, loving others like we love ourselves means we have the sum ready worked out in our own case to apply to others. So if we imagine that we'd been caught doing something awful, even though we wouldn't like ourselves very much, we would still hope that we could do better, that people would be kind to us, that we would have another chance. and we would still be, in a manner of speaking, very fond of ourselves. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So how do we balance this? Like, does this mean that anytime anybody who's a Christian sins, I should confront them? So, say, for instance, hypothetically, I was going to use Winged as an example, but we'll do it. Okay.
Have at.
So, say Winged is playing a game of Hearthstone and he gets a little carried away, and he accidentally cusses in Discord. Does that mean I just ban him from Discord so he can think about his decisions that he's made?
Certain people might.
He's made in his life to bring him to this point, right? Is that what I should do there? Yes.
Wow. I'm very pleased with the amount of yeses in there. All right. Thanks, guys. Nice to know that mercy and compassion are strong amongst.
Okay. Okay, it's a good thing that we're talking about this. Okay, yes, I'm willing to subscribe. So I would say it's probably not the right way to handle that. And the reason is, number one, there's a big difference between somebody getting, I would say, okay, how do I phrase it? There's a difference between like an isolated sin and a pattern of behavior, right? So the key word here is kind of caught. It's the idea that this guy is not that I caught him, but that he's actually trapped in this pattern of behavior, and he can't get himself up. So he's almost like he's caught in quicksand and he needs help, or he's drowning and he needs help, right? The other patron saint of the Bible study, Timothy Keller, had a good point in his commentary. He
Praise
goes,
be.
we should thank you. I was waiting for that. We should balance this passage with 1 Peter 4:8 and 1 Corinthians 13:5 and 8, which is basically that we need to kind of show mercy and have patience with our brothers and sisters, and that love covers a multitude of offenses. Now, what I'm not saying is we should just gloss over serious sin, because those verses have been used to say that too, which is also not right. But there's a big difference between, dropping the hammer on somebody because they got a little cut up with themselves in a game of Hearthstone, versus, somebody has a recurring pattern of behavior. Maybe they have a chemical addiction, or they're stuck in a pattern of another sin that's self-destructive or destructive to the community, and they need to be talked about. Maybe they have a huge temper and they're just like they just blow up at people all the time, right? That's something where they should be pulled aside in the spirit of love and said, hey, like, you should really work through this for your own sake and for the sake of those around you. So let me help you. And that's the idea. This is something that they can't necessarily break out of this themselves. They need help. Yeah, that's exactly what it is, Cass, a rescue mission. Okay, go ahead, Winged. You had your hand raised.
I think it's an important idea to remember that, you mentioned, not wanting to gloss over something in our attempts to be compassionate. It's in situations like this, it's all too important to remember that it's not quite a dichotomy, or I guess it is a sort of dichotomy, but the two kind of inseparably linked characteristics of God are love and hope, two things that we're called to. So we should, if we're going to try and help a brother, then yes, we should try to help him because we are called to holiness, but we're not to do it just harshly and just browbeat them. We're called to do it in love, and by the same token, we're called to love them, but that doesn't mean we let them continue in this thing that they're caught in, because we're called to holiness. So I think it's the proper application of both of those aspects and those commands that we're given that really guide this passage.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I would say we don't need to get up in everybody's face, right? We need to be slow to criticize people, tell them their faults, especially if we don't know them. But we must not overlook someone who is caught in sin or trapped in a pattern of behavior, right? Speaking out about a habit of sinful behavior which cannot be overcome without help. That's kind of what this is focusing on. This is a help thing. This is like Kessa said, a rescue mission. It's not shaming, shunning, judging, rumor mongering. Not any of those things, right? It's done with the spirit of helping them. Now, the other thing that's interesting here is the word restore. Restore him in a spirit of gentleness. This is kind of a paradox too. The word used for restore there is a word that they would use also for it's actually setting a broken bone or putting a dislocated joint back in order. Any of you guys ever had a joint dislocated?
Nope.
Yes, but when you're double jointed, that doesn't mean near much.
I have had 2 dislocations. One was a finger.
Ow.
Yeah, and let me tell you, those Hearthstone words, yeah. One was a finger and one was my shoulder at one point. And both times the restoring process was not a pleasant process. Yeah. So it's again, even though it's a spirit of gentleness, and one time the shoulder one actually was in college. Uh, I tripped on a step because I was carrying a bunch of books. Saved the books incidentally, but hit the shoulder on the way going down in a way that dislocated my shoulder. And there was actually a nurse right there who was coming back from clinicals. Thank God for nurses, right? And she walked over, grabbed my arm, and set it back into place before the setting. Put my shoulder back in the joint before the swelling could set in and make it worse. And it was not a pleasant experience, as gentle as she was about it. But let me tell you, it felt a lot better when she was done. And I went and saw a doctor afterwards, and he goes, "You know what? You would have had a lot worse problems if she had not been right there. You had a lot worse evening than you had."
I'm honestly kind of impressed that it was
But it was what?
your shoulder, not your knee.
Yeah. Well, this was back in college.
Oh,
Yeah. So
the pattern had to start sometime.
yeah, exactly. So again, this is when somebody is helping you through something that you're caught in. It doesn't always feel the best. It can feel painful, even when they're doing it in a spirit of gentleness. But it is a much better thing in the long term. Prevents a lot more pain in the long run than it does in the short run. Took me hair to the knee. There we go. Okay. Good job, chat. Okay, so then it has this interesting thing about saying, watching out lest you also be tempted. What does that mean? Go ahead, Cass.
There's a couple things I could think of. One, if you're trying to help someone who has the same weakness you do, you're in a unique position for understanding them, but also in a unique, at a unique risk to be pulled in yourself. And 2, for all of there's the temptation to feel superior to.
Yep. Go ahead, Winged.
You would catch me when I had a mouthful of water. Thank you.
That's how I roll.
And no, pretty much exactly what Kessa said. She beat me. Kudos to her.
Yeah, no, so I think that the majority of the time I've heard this verse preached on, people talk about it as in you got to be really careful when you're helping somebody who's caught in sin, so you don't get caught in sin too. So you don't start, looking at pornography or doing drugs or freaking out and getting angry all the time. However, whatever, pick your sin of choice. I think the the bigger danger. I'm not saying that's not a danger. It is, obviously. Any one of us can fall into any particular sin. Um, but I think the bigger danger and the danger that Paul is talking about here, especially in light of verses 3-5, is what Kess and Reb and Wing have said. The "I'm better than you, sinner" temptation. Right? Because at least in the times when I've helped people, or tried to help people out of the sins they're trapped in, I would say it's not usually a sin that I would have struggled with in the past. Um, and there is definitely a temptation to think of yourself as, oh well, I'm a great guy. See how I'm helping this guy. I would never fall into that. I'm so much better than this. I am Christian level advanced, tier 1 Christian here, ladies and gentlemen. And the moment that you think that you're a tier 1 Christian, by the way, you're anything but. Yeah. Because I think that that's something we can all relate to, right? Because we start playing the comparison game, right? Well, look, yeah. Start thinking of yourself as, well, okay, I may struggle with, XYZ sin, but at least I don't struggle with this. At least I'm not addicted to Hearthstone, right? I may be addicted to PUBG.
I'm feeling picked on tonight.
Right. So, but that's the thing, right? I mean, you start thinking to yourself of, okay, well, because this guy's got this many problems, right? Wing gets addicted to Hearthstone. Because of that, I can cut myself some slack over here. But here's the deal, right? we're not judged according to other people, right? Whenever I talk to people about comparison, they're like, at least I'm not a Nazi, or at least I'm not a communist, at least I'm not Hitler. That guy deserves hell. Me, nah. I just have these tendencies here. Well, of course, we can always pick someone to be like, yeah, I'm sure I'm better than that person in this area. But we're never picking our weakness to their strengths, right? And when we think about how God judges, God doesn't judge in a favorites way. He judges based upon the law, right? And what have we talked about? What has Paul said? Anybody who's broken one part of the law is guilty of breaking the whole thing.
Darn it, Unger. Oh.
Sorry. I shouldn't have made that a rhetorical question. But right, we've talked about that in Galatians. He says that in Galatians. So if we've broken one part of the law, we're every bit as bad as the Nazi or the communist, based upon your political affiliation of choice. We're every bit as bad as that person in that sense. So we're not compared to them. We're compared to the standard of the law, and we have all broken the law. So that comes back to why we have to be humble, right? Because we're not approaching God on our own merit, thank God. We're approaching through Christ's mercy and through faith in Christ. So because of that, we cannot feel superiority about other Christians, especially Christians that we're trying to help out. So when we're helping people out of things they're trapped in, like we're called to do, we have to be careful that we don't fall into that sin of pride. Because that sin of pride makes us the same as the Judaizers. And we have talked about pretty clearly how harsh the Judaizers are judged. Okay. Anything you guys want to add on that before we move on to the next verse? It's 8:35. We're only through verse 1. Go ahead, Cass.
Sorry, I'll make it short. But I think the call out you made one or two studies ago about how Paul can frame out the Galatians this harshly because he's in a relationship with them already, and he's proven his love for them, and that gives him the right to correct them.
Yep, exactly. That relationship is important. All right, verse 2. Bear one another's burden and so fulfill the law of Christ. So, helping someone who's caught in a transgression is helping bear their burden. Um, this takes courage on our part to help them. It also takes courage and humility on the part of the person being helped. I speak from personal experience on this. So you guys have my knee has kind of become a meme around here, which is fine. It's fine. Just kidding. It is actually fine. Um, but yeah, you guys know that I had knee problems there for a while. Had to have surgery and stuff. The way that actually came, that I realized I had a problem, was I was doing an adventure race, heard it, took about 4 weeks off, figured it was fine, and then figured, you know what, I'm gonna be fine. I'm gonna go on a hiking, backpacking, camping trip with my brother. So in the massive humility that my brother and I have, we did not pick uh, a a track of the Superior Hiking Trail in Minnesota. Here, we did not pick a light level stretch of trail. We picked what is well known to be the most difficult part of the trail, and the part that was supposed to be done over a week-long period. We decided to try and do in 3 days. Um, on a knee that I figured was probably fine. So we went, and after the my brother was just telling the story the other night, actually. Um, After the first night, I went, you know what, my knee's not feeling that good. I'm just gonna take some Advil and rest and see how it goes. And in the morning, my brother goes, "How you feeling?" I go, "Oh, I'm probably feeling okay. Probably do this. Let's pack up and do it." So we pack up our packs, each of which weigh about 40, 50 pounds. Start hiking up this next this next steep scrambling ascent, and we get halfway. We get to the top, and I go, I can't do it. I, I can't. I'm not gonna. My knee's not moving. It's not moving the way it's not bending. It's not bending the way it's supposed to bend. It's not taking any weight. This is not gonna work. So my brother goes, okay, we're gonna have to figure something out. Well, we're in the middle of the woods. We have no cell phone service. This is not an area where where you can just call and have Uber come pick you up. So we decide to ditch our bags, hike back towards the road, and my brother's gonna go get he's gonna go hitchhike his way to the car, get the car, and then come pick us up. So I'm like, I feel bad about this. I'm not gonna let him go do this by himself. So I try to extract with him, okay? Because I have pride. Yeah. Um. So I'm going half the way. I'm trying to carry my bag. I'm trying to drag it down to the road and stuff. And my brother just stops me. He's like, look. He's like, you're defeating the whole purpose here. You just gotta let me go handle this. I'll take the bags to the road. You stagger, your cripple butt to the road. I'll get the car, right?
That's a brother talking right there.
He's like, just let me handle this, okay? But I'm the older brother. I'm the guy who's supposed to be looking out for him, right? I'm the big, tough shooter outdoorsman guy. It was one of the most humbling, difficult things for me to actually let him help me out of that situation. So what I learned from that, and what we both talked about from that, is it actually takes a decent amount of strength and humility to accept help and to let someone else bear your own burdens. Now, we have both been in situations where we've had to help each other out and things like that. You guys have heard about our adventures down in New Mexico and elsewhere. But that is part of the Christian walk as well. Is not just being the guy there to help the person, which you will be, but you will also be at some point the guy who needs to have your pack carried by the other guy, or the guy who needs to, or gal, who needs to be helped out of the quicksand. And when that time comes, you need to be humble enough and have the courage to be humble enough to take that rope to let the other person help you. All right. So that's verse 2. verses 3 through 5. If anyone thinks he is something, then he is nothing, for he deceives himself. Again, referencing back now to the personal responsibility, the lest you be tempted, part of verse 1. But let each one test his own work, then his reason to boast will be in himself alone and not his neighbor. For we each have to bear his own load. Load is different than the word there used for burden. Word for burden is the idea of almost a kind of an uncarryable weight, something that you're sunk with. The load is more of a like just your standard kit, right? So when we go camping, or when my brother and I were down in New Mexico for that trip, the Sniper Spire trip, we each had our own specific kit that we had to carry. Our own gun, our own ammo, our own pack, our own water, food, etc. So you have to carry you have to carry your own kit, right? So you're responsible for carrying your own load. It's the burden of others that you're also responsible for helping carry, and that other people can help you carry. So that again in verses 4 there, it's talking about how we're not judged based upon us versus others, the Christian faith. We're judged on our own works. We got to make sure that we are not just doing well in the areas that we're strong in, but that we're submitting to Christ and following Him in all the areas, right? So again, balancing that personal responsibility and the group accountability parts. C.S. Lewis had an interesting illustration, patron saint there, for this. But he talks about how it's easy to look at other people, maybe somebody with a mental disability or just somebody who is struggling with a particular sin, and think, haha, I'm better than them. But he goes, you know what? We're not judged for the building materials that we're given. Everybody's given different building materials, right? We're not judged for the building materials that we're given. We're judged on what we do with them. So if for some reason you think you are stronger than somebody else in some area, well, then you're responsible for doing everything you can with the strength that you've been given there. You're responsible for building the best thing you can with the materials that you're given. It's kind of like that Spider-Man quote, Spider-Man's uncle's quote about with great power comes great responsibility thing. But I think that's kind of what's being talked about here. And I think that's a good way of looking at it. So, any comments, questions, things you guys have to add on these first 5 verses here? Yep. I think it's actually from the same piece there, that quote that Kessa has. Yeah, it's true, right? And we talked about this back in the Samuel study about how God gets after Samuel about judging based on man's judgment. Man looks at appearances, right? He sees external things. God says he judges based upon the heart, perfect judgment. If I remember correctly, it's from one of the essays in God in the Dock. Oh, no.
Okay. It is from Mere Christianity? Oh, gosh, I need to reread that. I don't remember that particular.
There is a piece on it in the God in the Dock too.
Okay.
But, yeah.
That I believe.
All right. There's nothing else on that. We'll move on to verses 6 through 10. Verse 6, I have to admit, has been taken out of context in the past. We had one guy here at one point, actually. So it's long before your guys this time. We had a Bible study leader claim that he should be paid for leading Bible studies around here based upon verse 6. That's a misinterpretation of verse 6. So what verse 6 is actually talking about, let's read it and we'll talk about it. So the one who is taught the word share all good things with the one who teaches. Okay? So what does that mean? No, because we're not going to be judging people.
Honestly, I can only guess at what it means.
Winged says context. How does the context help us here, Winged?
Well, you could read and figure and probably come up with a pretty good guess, but I'm just looking ahead at verse 7 and kind of thinking, that seems to follow a certain, or it tends to be heading in a particular direction, it feels like. Because you have this idea of people sharing, the one who's taught shares with the one who teaches. And then immediately after that, no break in thought, he says, don't be deceived. God's not mocked. Whatever you sow, you get back.
Mm.
And so it feels like this is being directed towards the people to respond in kind to their teacher. What if their teacher is helpful and good? If their teacher is advising and leading them well, then you should support them. You should, and again, that's interpretation back to our old friend who took us out of context, but to be supportive back to your leaders, to stand with them, to help them, to lift them up as well. That would be kind of where I stand. There may be more of a particular inclination with this, but I would believe that the teacher is one that will receive back should receive back what he teaches. If he teaches well, if he teaches godly principles, then those who hear should reflect those godly principles back to him.
Yeah, I think that's a good interpretation. I would say too that there is a financial element here. So people, first of all, let me clarify. Winged and I do not do this as a job. We have jobs outside of this which support us.
Speak for yourself.
Okay. But specifically, it's talking about the people who are full-time vocational ministry, right? So they spend, their 40, 50, 60-hour work weeks giving to the church body. So this would be your pastors, those sorts of people. If those people are ministering to the church body and doing it in a way that honors Christ, and you're taking a benefit from that, you should be financially giving to them, because they're giving up their ability to support themselves so that they can serve the body of Christ. Okay. So there is a financial element to that. That does not apply in the context of online ministry where we're all volunteers. The part that does apply, I think, is interesting is what Winged was saying. We see continuously in Galatians and in Revelation, we talked about the 7 churches, the churches are responsible for what their teachers teach. A leader is not a leader if nobody's following. So the Judaizers have been given a platform by the Galatian church. And there's this idea here that the Galatian church is in some way supporting the Judaizers financially, or just by allowing them to teach, giving them the prestige to give them that platform. But they're not supporting the good teachers, the people that teach the actual gospel. So because of that, the Judaizers have a platform to continue to lead more people astray and divide the church. And whose responsibility is that? That's the responsibility of the Galatian church. So we see that in the letters to the 7 churches from Christ too. He gets after 3 of the 7 churches about allowing certain things to be taught. And the only way these full-time teachers are going to have the ability to teach is if they're supported financially and given a platform by the congregation. Yeah, exactly. If you weren't watering that weed, it wouldn't grow. Exactly. Because back then, that was how it was the understanding of that was if you're a teacher, your students support you. If you're a pastor, your church supports you. There are certain things that would stop me if my pastor got up and said certain things on Sunday. That would stop me from giving money to the church. I'd find a different church to support, right? Or I'd have a conversation first, but that would eventually be. There are certain things that, if taught, I would not allow myself to support that church, because you vote with your time. You give support with your time. You give support with your attention. You give support with your finances, and the teaching that you're giving that support to. You're morally accountable for that. So let the one who is taught the word share all good things with the one who teaches. The idea of the word we use there for share is the same root word as the Greek word for community. So it's the idea that enter into community with the people who are teaching the good things or doing the good work. Be good community members for them. So you do that by giving them your attention, by giving them your fellowship, by giving them your time and your money in the context of a church. Because you're allowing them then to go there and teach. I have total faith in when I go to my church, I know that my pastor is using those resources for the kingdom of God. I'm very comfortable doing so because I know that both pastors are using those resources incredibly well. So you have to. I think it's important for us to know that when we do that, we are entering into that community service there with that. Do not be deceived, God is not mocked, for whatever one sows, he will also reap. So he sows to his own flesh, he'll reap from the flesh corruption. Again, will that be supporting the false teachers? Or just spending your resources on your own fleshly desires? Wing did a good job last week about talking about what we're talking about when we see about defining what we're talking about when we say the word flesh there. When we say the word flesh, what are we talking about? Yeah. We're not talking about our body. This isn't some sort of new Neoplatonism here or Gnosticism here. The body's not evil. What we're talking about is the basic desires of our fallen nature, our sin nature. Exactly. Yep. So if you sow that sin nature, if you continue to feed that sin nature, you'll reap corruption. That's where you spend your money, your time, your attention. There's a consequence for that. Sometimes we think, well, if I just give into the sin a little bit here, it'll be like taking the pressure off a little bit. Quite the opposite. When you give into sinful desires, when you spend your money, your time, your attention, when you look at the things that you're tempted by, that does not help the temptation. That strengthens the sinful nature, strengthens the flesh. But the one who sows the Spirit will from the Spirit reap eternal life. Let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. So I think we've kind of clarified what we mean by this, but it's also interesting, and this goes back to Romans and Ephesians and James. We've talked very clearly throughout the book of Galatians about how works do not save us. Faith plus works for salvation equals equals not, right? But there's no such thing as faith without work, right? The faith is what saves us. The faith also brings with it work. So that's what we've been talking about from this, right? If we truly are saved, if we truly want the things of God, then we will spend our time, our attention, our money on the things of the Spirit, not the things of the flesh. Verse 10, so then, as we have the opportunity, Let us do good to everyone, especially those who are in the household of faith. So, um, again, as Christians, we're supposed to love one another, love our neighbors. That's part of our duty as of being Christians and loving God. Part of our job. Um, but we are also supposed to, especially, do good to those in the household of faith, other Christians, which is interesting. I know a lot of people who are like, I'm not really interested in helping other Christians. I just want to go out and talk to unsafe people. Yeah, that's not really not really what Paul says. So, uh, we are indeed supposed to make disciples of all nations, but that is done in the context of community, in the context of the church.
Question.
Yes.
I would ask anybody that says that, then why are you going and talking to unsafe people? If you're not interested in helping Christians, then why are you trying to make non-Christians into Christians?
Man, it's so true. So true. Um, the college that I went to had a really good emphasis on missions, which was good, but oftentimes it de-emphasized discipleship, which was really bad.
Yeah.
Um, and it was a constant conflict for me. I think sometimes it was like, oh, there goes that marginal Baptist talking about this stuff again. But Baptist high five winging. But
Hang on, I got you.
I was kind of in the minority at college at that, but it was and again, I can de-emphasize missions sometimes too much, so it's important to balance things out. But I thought it was really telling. One of the people who I had a lot of uh, debates with, he was had been a missionary for a long time. Great guy, definitely had a heart for Christ. Him and I argued a lot about what was the right emphasis in ministry. And he had told a story near the end of my time at college where he realized that he was doing missions wrong at one point in his life, where he was almost doing missions with an agenda. He was reaching out to people just to get them saved, and then was moving on past and not engaging with them as who they were, not loving them for their intrinsic value as human beings, instead of just kind of a target to get saved. Um, and how once he realized that his relationships got a lot more authentic, um, ironically, his missions work got a lot more effective. Imagine that. But yeah, it's true, right? I mean, if the problem with that sort of scorched earth missions mentality is it it it, it views people the wrong way, and I think that this verse here puts the emphasis on the right thing, right? We are supposed to reach out to people outside the family of faith, but certainly not at a detriment to people inside the church, right? We should be especially loving with one another inside the church because we're part of the same family. And granted, like everybody, it's not a merit thing, so we're not better than people outside the church. We're not. We've talked about that. Um, but we should not only serve those outside the church. We should look to people inside the church and ask, how can I help them when they're going through tough times too? How can I help bear their burden and not just always be facing outwards? Yeah, it's not a numbers game, Bob. Exactly. Yeah, it's both and. Yep. Evangelize and make disciples. Yep. Good. All right. That's all I got. I was woman over. Apologize. Well, realized I was a little bit behind, so I asked fewer questions than usual. Um, anything you guys have to add or or to point out from these verses tonight?
I would simply add that sometimes you run into problems with people that don't want help. Like in the first part of the verse, it says, you should gently and humbly help that person back onto the right path. But every once in a while in life, I'll come across somebody who just doesn't want help. So then what?
That's a good question. What have you done when you've run into that in your life?
Well, I guess just pray for them and let God deal with them.
Anybody else have anything they want to add to that? I do have something I want to say. I just want to see how what everybody else has to say too. It's a good question, though, Lagan.
Sorry, I was typing something else. Could you repeat the question?
What do you do when you run into somebody who doesn't want help or won't accept help?
I'll just leave this one open because, basically it's like, how do you deal with me? And Kess, I'm looking at that response. My first thought is, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Lagan, but my impression with your question is not that he doesn't want to change his ways. It's that he wants to work out his situation by himself. He doesn't want to get other people involved. Is that the connotation, or am I reading this incorrectly?
No, I would agree. That's one example. I mean, there's a lot of reasons for why somebody might not want help. Could be they just don't want to change, or like you said, maybe they want to change. They just want to do it on their own. So it's like maybe you should just step back when you make that decision.
Right. I just wanted to. I saw people, instantly go to Matthew 18, and while I believe that, that can be a principle to follow if the person is unwilling to change, absolutely. But if the person wants to change but doesn't believe that they need help, that's where things get a little fuzzier.
So I would say the person who wants to change but doesn't believe they need help, they'll find out pretty soon that they do need help.
Yeah.
Reference Superior Hiking Trail trip with Ungarth and my brother.
Experience is a mean teacher, but it's a good teacher.
Yeah. Let me tell you, after about a half mile of stumbling through, not being able to walk with a 40-pound pack, I realized that I do actually need help. And unfortunately, sometimes you got to step back and let the person realize they do need help. But I was actually just having this conversation with one of my coworkers, who's not a Christian, but does a lot of work with Teen Challenge. This is a Christian addiction rehab place here in Minnesota. And basically, if they don't want help and they don't think they have a problem, there isn't much you can do for them outside of praying and continuing to love them. But you're not responsible for you can't make them want to change. This was actually the phrase that she used when we were talking about this the other day. Some people, you can't make someone want to change, right? And so I think that Matthew 18:17 passage applies pretty well there. Yeah, you can't be saved until you realize that you're lost. Yeah.
Yeah, because like the verse sort of implies like the person wants help, but that's just not always the case.
Yeah.
It says, to help them back on the right path.
And because it's specifically talking about somebody in the church, you can have the conversation about, hey, sometimes you need to show them why they have a problem. But there is a point at which it's kind of like, okay, I've I've showed you, that you have a problem. If you don't want to believe you have a problem, then there's not much I can do for you other than pray and take this before the church. Kind of go from there, kind of like the Matthew passage says. Yeah, it's a good question though. Yeah, but the person who realizes that they have a problem wants to Lone Ranger it. Sooner or later, they usually realize that that's not going to work out too good or too well, technically. Although moral judgment.
Why do we keep using the term Lone Ranger to describe alone. Lone Ranger had Tonto. What the world?
Yeah, misnomer.
Sorry. That was a weird rabbit trail. Sorry, weird flex.
So how do we apply this week? Gonna restate the question. What's one thing from this passage that we talked about that we can apply this week? Yes. Go ahead, Cass.
The verse that jumps out at me most is usually verse 9 when I've read this passage, and it's because there can be a long gap between doing good and, as he implies, in due season we will reap. It feels like you do good and, to put it bluntly, you get ripped off. And that's a hard feeling to work through. But he says, be patient.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Sorry, thinking about different ways that applies. Yeah, because it's true. I think that we've all felt that way, and it's really easy to get bitter and jaded, cynical. We call it realistic, right? I'm realistic. I'm hard. Um, but but it's true. Like we don't work for man, right? We work for God. So in due time, we're promised that we will reap a reward for this. So go ahead, Winged.
I find it interesting how Paul just finishes talking about the fruit of the Spirit in chapter 5. Then the next 10 or 11 verses, the principles that he kind of dictates here are about a characteristic that he doesn't mention in the fruit of the Spirit, but is kind of just kind of woven into it, and that's humility.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like he's saying, these are characteristics, but they all just fit in so well. And I look at a passage like this and I just keep hearing the word service, 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 and just how selfless we as Christians are called to be. The idea of helping one another with their burdens, that 8-foot dresser, as we said. But at the same time, things like in verse 9, how we're called to not be weary in well-doing. Don't get tired doing good. And, that essentially, that's a look of pride. We talked about the prodigal God. We had that book study. Can't believe that was years ago. But
Oh man, I can't believe that was that long ago. It feels like it was yesterday.
I know, right? But when we went through the prodigal God, we talked about how the older son was like, I have worked for you, done good. I have obeyed you for my entire life, and you never gave me anything. When in all honesty, he was looking for the wrong thing. And so I feel like this is kind of the same exhortation that Paul's giving here, is this call to humility. You know, we're serving a great God. And we know, back to Romans, Bible greatest commentary on itself, all things work together for good. You just got to be patient and be humble. And patience does make its way into the fruit of the Spirit, by the way. Talked about that a little bit last week. But it's, oh my goodness, it's so cool. This is awesome. Yeah, and even cast the living sacrifice over to Romans 12. You know, you have no rights. You've sacrificed that to serve the body of Christ. And so that's why we serve one another. We're all part of the same body. We build each other up. We hold each other up. And it's, oh my goodness. Yeah. Galatians, Romans, it's the same book, just a few less chapters. I'm sorry. I'm getting worked up.
No, it's true. So that was what I was actually going to say as my application. When I was thinking about this week of how, well, what do I take away from this, right? Because there's a lot in here. I mean, Cass pointed out the don't grow weary of doing good thing. There's the bearing one another's burdens, having the humility to be helped, having the humility to help others, making sure that we're supporting the right teachers, right? And the different ways that means. Using our resources for the right ways, not just using them on ourselves, but actually using them to support the church, those sorts of things. But the thing I think that is most applicable for me this week is the humility part. Because I don't know about you guys, but I careen wildly in my self-image from I'm awful to I'm just short of a god, right? Like I'm usually at one of those two extremes: extreme arrogance or extreme self-condemnation. so what's interesting about that is there's like a middle ground taken here, and both those extremes have me looking at myself and assessing myself. And here it's Paul's basically saying, look, like like you need to go out and help one another for their own good, right? And if you think that you're better than them when you're helping them, remember that you're matching up against not them but God's standard. So bear your own load, like square away your walk, but the emphasis isn't on them judging themselves. It's on doing good, right? Serving those around you. So having communion with those around you. In a sense, having community with those around you. So if I'm out there, if I'm serving God, I'm serving those around me, I'm helping those out around me. I'm thinking about how I'm saved by faith, not my own work. Thank God. I am not sitting there assessing myself and thinking I'm a better Christian than everybody else here, right? I'm a worse Christian than everybody else here. I've taken the eyes off of my performance and judging myself on the scoreboard of Christianity, because there is no scoreboard. And instead I'm serving others and loving God and being appreciative for what God's done. So it's not arrogance and it's not self-condemnation. It's humility, kind of a confident humility, like Schreiber was saying. And that I think is the number one thing that I can take and apply this week. Because like I said, I'm usually careening between one of the two extremes. So no scoreboard on your roster. Good stuff. All right. Anything else you guys want to add before we start taking prayer requests? All right. Prayer requests. We're going to close out in prayer.